walking through the town, and he wakes up and he finds out his donkey. He's taken his donkey, and his donkey is run off, his donkey is gone. Well, as it goes to Nasruddin, he has to make, you know, the big thing out of everything. It goes around the town. Anybody can help me find my donkey? Anybody can help me find my donkey? Who helped me find my donkey? Who helped me find my... You know, the whole town, of course, is woken up. It's early in the morning. Everybody's up, you know, in the town square. Finally, they all gather around. And they all finally get on their way, finding Nasruddin's donkey. So the whole town is out there looking for his donkey. And as they're walking around, you've got everybody up there looking around. He says, Alhamdulillah, he's walking around. Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. Alhamdulillah, you know, the whole time, it's the whole town out there looking for his donkey. Finally, the people, exasperated, turn to him and says, what do you mean? You've got the whole town out looking for your donkey. And you're saying, Alhamdulillah, praise be to God, Alhamdulillah. He says, yes. He says, just think. If I would have been on my donkey, I would have been lost too. So in the land of Afghanistan, there's this sultan, and when he first started ruling his kingdom, he was a good man, and he tried to be a just sultan. But over time, as time went on, all the, you know, as it goes with the things of the world, he's in a place of power and importance. His heart slowly got harder because he saw the corruption of the people, he saw the difficulty, and his heart became rusted, almost as if it was rusted over. His heart became hard, and he knew his heart was becoming hard, you know, and he felt bad about it. But what was he to do? Finally, he couldn't take it any longer. He felt he needed something. His heart became too hard. So he called one of his courtiers and says, please, 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 get me some clothes, some regular people's clothes, please, a cloak, and I can go out. And he wants to go amongst his people to look what he can find amongst his people. So he got given an old robe, and he put his old robe on. He put this old robe on, and he went out incognito, and he went to the marketplace, and he looked at this transaction, and he saw this one cheating that one, he saw this one weighing too little, and he saw all kinds of, you know, because what's in the eye of the beholder, of course, is what you see. And since his heart was hard, and he could only see that which was difficult, and that which was corrupt, and that which was tainted, that's all he saw. Wherever he looked, he saw this. And finally, he was ready to give up and go back to the palace. He didn't know what to do. He was in a complete state of difficulty and desperation. Until finally, there, way out at the edge of town, he saw a small clay hut, a small adobe hut, and there was a light in the window. There was something about that light that attracted him. There was something about the way it was placed that attracted him. So he decided this was the last chance. He was going to go here and see what he could find. So he set on his way, and there, along a small creek, by this small adobe place, he looked in the window, and there was a young man sitting there, his robe and he had a table in front of him. And on his table, there was one small loaf of bread. Just a loaf of bread. It was a completely bare room. There was one small loaf of bread. Just enough maybe to feed one, maybe two people. So he decided, well, he wanted to see what was there something attracting him to this place. So he knocked on the door. The young man opened the door. And he was a young Sufi sheikh who was sitting there, who had just finished his day's work, and he was sitting there and he said, who are you? I said, please, do you have anything for me? The Sultan said, and he didn't recognize him, of course. He was dressed in his, in his threadbare clothes. And he says, come in. There's food here. What is enough for one is enough for two. So he invited him in. And he sat him down. And together they shared that loaf of bread. And finally the Sultan looked up at him and says, what do you do for work? What is it? He said, I mend shoes. He said, every day I go to the market. I don't make shoes, but I fix people's shoes. And every day I get just enough to buy a small loaf of bread, a small piece of cheese, just to feed myself. Oh, I said, the Sultan, what will you do tomorrow? What will you do if you get sick? What will you do if something happens? There's not enough work if you're living on the edge, just like that every day. And the man looked up at him and says, all will be well, inshallah, as Allah wills it. All will be well, inshallah. Well, said the Sultan, we'll see. And he said out, and he says, thank you, and at least for tonight. So, he set out on his way. And the next morning, as the young man went to the marketplace, and he came into the marketplace, there was an edict on the wall that had been posted that said, nobody is allowed to repair shoes anymore in the marketplace. All shoes must be bought new. The young man looked at that, all he knew to do was to repair shoes, and suddenly it was forbidden to repair shoes, because of course the Sultan had scissors and let's see what would happen. Repair shoes anymore. What was he to do? He stood there in the marketplace at the edge and looked around, and there suddenly, in the distance, he saw men coming down from the mountains, and they were carrying big bundles of sticks for the ovens, for the bakeries in town. And he said, I'm a strong young man, I can do that. So he decided he was going to be a wood carrier. So he walked up to the mountains, and he spent the rest of the day gathering sticks and bringing them down from the mountains down to town to feed the ovens of the bakeries. Well, that night again, the Sultan, he dressed in his threadbare clothes, and he went on his way, and he walked through town, and finally he came to the small adobe hut by the edge of the creek. And this time, as he looked in the window, not only did he see a loaf of bread, he saw a piece of cheese next to it. Again, he knocked on the door. And of course, the young man recognized him. He invited him and says, I had a good day today. Well, how come? Said the Sultan in hiding. I saw this edict today saying nobody was allowed to repair shoes. I said, you're right, but I saw the wood carriers coming from the mountains. I decided I was strong, I could do the same work, so Allah provided me with more. This is why I have cheese, and we have bread, and you could share it. So they shared the cheese and the bread together. Well, what was he to do? The Sultan looked at him after the meal and says, yes, but you still look at this, you have this and that. What would you do if tomorrow you couldn't have work? If something happened to you, if you broke something, what would you do? He says, the young man said, all will be well. It's in Allah's hand, inshallah. So, of course, as you went to the marketplace the next day, there was a sign up saying that nobody was allowed to carry wood, except that they had a permit from the Sultan. Of course, the young man didn't have a permit. What was he to do? He didn't know how to get a permit. He figured all these other wood carriers must have a permit. What was he to do? He stood there again on the marketplace looking around, and suddenly he saw an old woman, and she was by the well, and she was pulling the bucket of water up from the well and pouring it into her big clay jug to carry it home. And he walked up to her and says, my lady, please, let me do this for you. And with that, he pulled the water up out of the well. He filled the urn up all the way to the top. He took the urn, he put it on his back, and he carried it home for her. Oh, all the way back to where she was living. And as he sat it down in the courtyard of her house, she took a small coin out of her pocket and gave it to him. So he went back to the well, and all day he spent carrying water for all people from the well, pulling it up and carrying it all the way back to their house. Well, that night, of course, as he came home and the sultan went out again in his clothes, he came to the small hut, and there he knocked on the door. And as he came in, not only did he see bread, he saw cheese, he even saw some fruit by the side. He was completely perplexed. What is this? What happened to you? He said, there was this sign today saying, only with a permit can you carry wood. So I decided, I looked around in there, Allah provided me with a means. There was an old woman at the well, and he told her the whole story of what he had done all day. The sultan shook his head and says, what would you do if something happens to you? What will you do? He said, all will be well. Inshallah. Well, the next day, of course, as you can imagine, he was just about to set out from the marketplace, when suddenly, as they were standing there with a group of people ready to work, the captain of the guards of the palace came. And the captain says, all of you, and he turned to the whole group, you're all recruited to come. We need guards for the Sultan's palace, and all of you are recruited to become guards to the Sultan's palace. So the whole group was brought to the Sultan's palace, but our young man was singled out by the captain and says, you guard the gate to this palace. And he was given a sword to carry and stand there at the gate. But the captain said, only all of you get paid at the end of the week. Not before that. You finish a week, you get paid. So here our young man was standing. He had a sword by his side, standing to guard the gates to the palace. The day went by, the evening came. He was discharged by the captain of the guards, but he didn't have a single penny in his pocket. What was he going to do? How was he going to eat? He walked down the street when suddenly he saw one of the pawn merchants by the side in the souk. And he looked at the pawn merchant's store, and he looked at the sword, and he said, after all, I just stand there and never use my sword. Why not I take it? He took the sword and he went to the pawn merchant's shop, and he pawned the sword. He figured at the end of the week I get paid, I can take it back. So there he pawned the sword. And with the money that he received, he came home, and that night when the Sultan was there, not only was there bread on the table, not only was there cheese on the table, there was a little bit of fruit on the table, there was even some sherbet on the table. And he came there, and he knocked on the door, and he saw this small feast standing there. And he says, what happened? How come? I heard you were recruited to the guards of the Sultan. He said, yes, but he said as he was standing there and he had a long piece of wood that he was shaping. He says, I took my sword and I pawned it, you see, and now I'm making a wooden sword. And I figured I'll replace my real sword with this wooden sword, put it in my scabbard, and nobody will ever know. The Sultan, he slyly smiled and thought, now I have it. We will see tomorrow. So, of course, because he was still very, very cynical, very cynical. So that night he finished carving that sword, and the next day he went on guard duty, and there again he stood in front of the gates to the palace. And he stood there for most of the day, and suddenly in the afternoon there was a commotion there in the distance. And the guards brought a man in. And they said, this man, he was caught, he was a thief. He was caught in the souk, he was caught in the market, stealing. Please, and he brought him in front of this guard, in front of our young man, with his sword, and said, and since he was a thief and stealing, his hand should be cut off. The crowd gasped. The young man turned to the guard, to the captain of the guard, and said, what do you mean? Why was he taking something? Maybe he didn't have enough to eat. Maybe his family didn't have enough to eat. That is surely a reason for him to be excused from this punishment. No, the captain of the guard said, it must be. So finally he looked around at the assembled crowd of people, and in the very distance behind there, he saw the Sultan standing there. And of course, by then he had long knew who he was, and finally he turned and reached over and looked straight at the Sultan. And then Suddenly he stood in front of the crowd of people and says, "In the eyes of Allah, this man is guilty. May I be able to cut off his hand. But if in the eyes of Allah, this man is innocent, may my sword turn to a wood sword." With that, he pulled out the sword. Everybody gasped. There under the sky came a wooden sword. So the man who had stolen was set free. And with that he looked at the Sultan and he says, "You see, all will be well." And he's in Allah's hand, inshallah. And at that moment, something happened to the heart of the Sultan. That rust that was around his heart, it sort of gave way and cracked. And he looked at the young man and realized that after all, he must have been a Sufi sheikh. And he asked him to advise him from now on in the rest of his work in the kingdom. I think he had his robe. Well, one day, there was a young man named Nasir. Come and sit here. Come and sit here. Come and sit here.
Some chairs in front, up on the side. There's a chair.
Oh, you can sit on the floor, you can sit on the chair. There's another chair here. There was a young man named Nasir, and he lived in central Anatolia. And in those days, you know, in the countryside, it was very, very poor. And he lived in a small village, and he had almost, his family had a wife, and he had 3 children, but they were very, very poor. So one day he said to his wife, "Life is too hard here. I have to go to the city. I have to go to work. I'll go to Istanbul. I make enough money for the whole family to set up a small business in this village, and from then on we'll live good, but I have to go away for several years to work." So he set out on foot and walked and walked and walked and walked and walked and walked until finally he came to Istanbul. And there in the city, he did all kinds of work. In those days they had porters, everything was carried up and down the hills in Istanbul. He was a street sweeper, he carried water, he did any work that he could find. And since he was a very, very hard worker, and he very simply, by the side, he earned good money. And after a while he collected a whole bundle of coins. And he was getting worried because after all he was living in a hostel by the side, and there was all kinds of people passing by and fro. What was he to do? How was he going to keep his money safe? Finally he exchanged his coins for paper money. But even after a while, for a couple of years, he'd earned a good amount of paper money. Finally he said, "I have to do something." And he had an old threadbare robe that he would wear every single day. And one day as he was clearing up in the cloth merchant's souk, in the cloth merchant's market, he found all these pieces of fabric that had been thrown, these offcuts. And suddenly he had an idea. He took his old threadbare robe. He knew how to keep his money safe. He sewed a patch like this on his robe, and after he'd sewn it, he slipped a small bundle of money right under that patch and sewed it shut. So this was a very safe way to keep his money. So as he kept working, every time he earned a bundle of money, he would sew a patch on his robe and slip the money in there and sew it shut. So you can imagine after several years of working, the robe was completely covered with patches all the way down. It became quite heavy, but after all, he knew it was worth carrying. So finally, after he had worked in the city for 5-6 years, he got homesick. He said, "You know, my children are growing up. If I don't go home now, they won't even recognize me when I come back. After all, I've earned enough money." So he set out from the city of Istanbul and walked and walked and walked and walked and walked all the way back to his village. Until finally he came to the village, and there finally outside his house were his children, and he called out to them. They barely recognized him. But finally he said, "I'm your father, I came back, please, please." They all threw their arms around him, they hugged him, he was so happy. And he walked into the kitchen, and their mother had just gone out to do several errands, because, you know, by all kinds of means she was trying to earn a small living so they could survive. She'd just gone out, and he took his robe off, and he hung his robe on the side, on a hook, by the door, because it was a hot summer's day. And then, just as he was standing in the kitchen, the call to prayer went off. Well, he was so grateful that he'd been brought back to his family. He set off on his way to the mosque to pray. Well, he barely left to go to the mosque to pray. And he told his children that now he'd come back, and he'd come back because he was a rich man. He had enough money for all of them to live and set up a business and live well for the rest of their days. Well, of course, the children ran up to their mother. Mother, 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 look, our father has come back, and now he's a wealthy man, he's a rich man. He's going to set up a business and will be well provided for the rest of our days. Of course, her heart lifted up. She was very, very happy. And this means and that means she'd been trying to make a living. Now finally she could relax a little bit. Well, just then, there was a knock at the door. And there was a beggar standing there at the door. And the beggar said, please, 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 please. Do you have anything for me? Anything for me? And the beggar, he had almost nothing on. He was threadbare. I mean, completely, you know, he barely had any clothes on. He had a cloth around his waist, a completely threadbare shirt. And she was, after all, a woman with a soft heart. And she looked at him and said, you can't walk around like this in town. She looked around, but she hadn't cooked anything. She had no food in the house. Finally, she looked around, and there was an old patched robe hanging by the door. And she took the patched robe and said, well, you know, after all, I do something. She took the patched robe and hung it around the shoulders of the beggar. Well, just then, her husband came back from the mosque, and he walked up. And he walked around, he hugged his wife, he hugged the children, he was so happy, everybody was happy. He turned around, he looked at the hook by the door and said, where is my robe? She said, there was this beggar, he came, and she explained the whole story. Well, you can imagine, he almost fainted on the spot. Because all the money that he had was now gone. What was he to do? He worked all these years. All the money was in this robe. Finally, he shook his head. What was he to do? 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 Finally, he jumped up. He had an old friend who ran a shop in the village. And he looked at the friend. He ran out and he went to the friend's shop and he looked around in desperation. And he says, please help me, please help me, please help me. And he looked, and there was a beautiful, beautiful robe hanging there. And these classical, beautiful robes hanging there. It almost looked like a sultan would wear it. He says, please, let me borrow this robe, let me borrow this robe. And there on the wall was a small old cracked violin. And he says, and I'll pay with the last money he has. I'll buy that violin. And with that, he borrowed the robe, the beautiful robe from him. And he took the old cracked violin from the wall. And he ran outside. And then he went to the marketplace in the middle of the town where everybody gathered. And there suddenly he stood in the marketplace. And he grabbed that violin, put it under his chin, and he started playing, I'm a fool, I'm a fool, I'm a crazy, crazy fool, I'm a fool, I'm a fool, I'm a crazy, crazy fool, I'm a fool, I'm a fool, I'm a crazy... Well, you can imagine, the people hadn't seen him for 5-6 years. He came back to town, the first thing they saw, he was standing in the marketplace, standing in front of everybody saying, I'm a fool, I'm a fool, I'm a crazy, crazy fool, Well, the whole town started getting him, he lost his mind. They all gathered around him. And even the beggar, who got to his wife, was standing there watching this strange spectacle in the middle of the marketplace. I'm a fool, I'm a fool, I'm a crazy, crazy fool. See what a fool I am, he said. And he walked up to the beggar, I'll take this beautiful robe and I'll exchange it for you a threadbare patched robe which has nothing but patches on it. Well, of course, the beggar was very happy. He'd get this beautiful robe. And the man took the beautiful robe off, and he took the patched robe off the shoulders of the beggar and hung a beautiful robe around the beggar. And quickly put that patched robe around his back on his back. And he shook his head. And then on his way out from the marketplace, he played this melody and he said, you're a fool, you're a fool, if you only knew. You're a fool, you're a fool, if you only knew. And with that, he gained all his money. He set up a business and he lived on from that day after quite well in the village. There's always there's a whole lore of animal stories that to teach lessons. Like Aesop's fables came from the Middle East. They came originally from the Muslim world and traveled to France, and various other La Fontaine's fables. Most of them came from the Muslim world and then traveled into Europe after that. So this is an Indian story of. In this story, the tiger is the sultan of the animals. When he lives in the forest, he's the king of the animals, the sultan of the animals, and he's got his lair in the middle of the forest. But as it goes with kings and sultans, they really don't do any of the work themselves. No, they have a wazir, or a prime minister, that does all the work for them. And they just sit there and rule. So, here's the tiger. He's after all the sultan, the king of the forest. And the wazir works very, very hard for him. But he's a very impatient sultan. He's very quickly displeased with his wazir. And it somehow happens that every time he's displeased with his wazir, that wazir disappears in a mysterious manner. Although everybody knows where that wazir disappears to. Because the tiger only got fatter and fatter and fatter. So you can imagine, the job was not very popular. But word went out to the forest again. The sultan had become displeased with his wazir. The wazir had mysteriously disappeared. But the job must be filled. So word went out through the jungle. The job must be filled. Well, you can imagine there wasn't a whole lot of takers, but finally 3 animals decided they would apply and set out for the job. It was the monkey, it was the jackal, and the rabbit. Well, they walked through the forest, they set out on the job, until finally they came to a big clearing in the forest, and there was a big gate there, and that was after all the tiger's clearing, and they knocked on the gate. And as they stood there, the gate opened, and there stood the tiger. "What do you want? What can I do for you?" Your Majesty, we came to apply for the job of wazir. "Yes, but I don't need 3 wazirs. 1 is enough." "Well, anyway, come in. And he brought him to the clearing. And he looked around them with his fierce glance and his sharp teeth. Well, I will put each of you to the test. Come here. Well, the monkey was the first one. He decided to be the first one. And he looked like this in front of the tiger, and he stood there crouching down below the tiger. The tiger looked down at him, and the tiger drew up his breath and went, and he blew his breath like this all over the monkey. And that breath, it was foul, it stank, it was horrible. "Well," said the tiger, "what do you think of my breath?" Well, what was that monkey going to say? "Oh, Your Majesty, that breath is so sweet. It smells like roses." "Ah, you see, animals like you, they flatter me, they fawn me, they never speak the truth. No, that's no good for a wazir. I don't need a wazir like that." And with that, he pounced upon the monkey. And within minutes, the monkey was gone. Well, you can imagine the other 2 animals. By then, they're shaking, their paws were shaking. So the jackal said, all right, here, go next. So the jackal came, and again, he came in front of the tiger. And the tiger stood there, and he drew in his breath and went, and he blew that foul, stinking breath all over the jackal. "Well, what do you think of my breath?" "Oh, Your Majesty, that breath, it was horrible, it was terrible. Please don't ever do that again." "Ah, you see," said the tiger, "some animals, they speak too much of the truth. And too much of the truth only in the end hurts too, and becomes difficult." And with it, he pounced on the jackal. And the jackal was gone in minutes. Well, the only one left was the rabbit. The rabbit. Well, by then, his knees were almost knocking against each other, you can imagine. But what was he to do? After all, he'd come to apply for the job. So he crouched there in front of the tiger. The tiger drew in his breath and went, and he blew that foul, stinking breath all over the rabbit. And the rabbit stood there and went, "Well," said the tiger, becoming impatient. "Your Majesty," said the rabbit, "please, can you do that again?" Again? The tiger again went, and he blew that foul, stinking breath again all over the rabbit, and the rabbit went. This rabbit's too. Finally, the tiger impatient said, "Well, what is it? What is it?" "Oh, Your Majesty, it just so happens I have a terrible, terrible cold, and I can't smell anything at all." "Ah," said the tiger, "you see, that's the kind of wazir I need for anybody who wants to be involved in affairs of state. It is better if they have no sense of smell at all." And somehow after that, that rabbit became the best wazir the tiger ever had, but never lost his cold. He gained his sense of smell. So again, in the city of Istanbul, there was a young man who'd come from Anatolia, and he'd come to work, and his name was Ahmed. And Ahmed had come to the city to work, and again earn a living for his family in the village, down in the mountains of Anatolia, to come back and again provide for his family. And he's working as a chepchi, as they say in Turkish, as a street sweeper. And he swept the streets, and he worked very hard, and he also lived very simply. And as he worked for several years, he worked sweeping the streets of the city, keeping it clean, going from place to place. He earned a good amount of money, quite a big bag of money. He became very, very worried. What was he going to do with this money? How is he going to keep it safe? Well, one day as he was walking around, he heard about one of the judges, one of the qadis in the village. One of the judges in the village who was supposed to be a very, very honest man. So he decided to go to the court and see if the judge would keep the money safe for him. So he set out and he came into the courtroom, and there was a judge sitting behind his desk. And he turned to the judge and said, "Please, please, look at this bag of money. I'm a poor street sweeper. Please, could you keep this bag of money safe for me?" And the judge's eyes, just seeing the bag of money, lit up and said, "Sure, I'll keep it safe for you." And with that, he took the bag of money and he put it in a cabinet which was in his desk. Oh, the street sweeper, after all, this was an honest judge. He was well known in the city. He decided he didn't even ask for a receipt. So he set out again on his way, and he worked for quite a while still, about several months. He kept working and working and working until one day after work he was sitting in the tea house, and he met some people from his village that were traveling through, and they were on their way back, and they started talking about the village, and they started talking about his family, they started talking about their families, and his heart became so homesick. He said, "You know, I've worked for several years, I have a big bag of money. After all, maybe if I go back, who knows what will happen to me? Maybe I get sick, maybe I won't see my family again." He got so homesick, he said, "I'm going home. I'm going back to my village. With this money that I've earned, surely I can do some business and I can make a living for my family." So he set out on his way to the court, and he came into the courthouse, and he came to the judge's chambers, and he said, "Please, Your Honor, you remember me? I came to you several months ago, and I gave you that bag of money in your safekeeping. Please, could I have it back? I must go back to my family. I'm homesick, please." The judge looked up and says, "Who are you? I've never seen you before. What money are you talking about? Do you have a receipt for this money? Anybody could come in here and claim they gave me money. Where's your receipt?" Of course, the poor man, he had no receipt, nothing. Nobody had seen this transaction. He called the guard, come here, this man, take him out. There's nothing to do. He makes a false claim." And he threw him out of the courtroom, threw him out of the building. Well, you can imagine. Right then, his shoulders sank, his arms dropped down. He had nothing left to do. Money was gone. He was completely despondent. He could barely lift his broom to sweep the streets. Foot before foot, he saw himself working another long, long time, and now he didn't have the energy that he had at first. All his money was, everything was gone. What was he to do? He could barely move his broom. Finally, he was so desperate, he sat down on the curb of the street, and as he sat down, he let out a sigh, which was so deep that if you heard it, it would crack your heart. But it just so happened that he sat down below the balcony of a Hanem, a lady, they call him a Hanem, that had just finished her prayers. It was a big, wealthy house, and she was sitting there on her prayer rug, finished her prayers, when she heard that sigh. Of course, it penetrated her heart immediately. She heard that it almost cracked her heart, that sigh. It was so deep. She wanted to know the story behind it. So carefully she stood up from her prayer rug. She opened the little mushabi, the latticework window, and looked down, and there she saw the Chukchi sitting on the curb. And she says, "Oh, listen, Effendi. Please, please, tell me your story. I heard this sigh. I need to know what is your story." And he looked at this Han, this noble lady up there looking out of the latticework window, and says, "You're a wealthy lady, you have no business with me. You wouldn't be interested in my story." "No, no, no," she said. "Please, please, a sigh like that I've never heard. Tell me your story." Well, of course, finally, it all came out. He told the Hanem his whole story. And she withdrew her head and she stood there for a moment thinking. And finally, after a couple of minutes of thinking, she put her head out of the window and said, "Listen, tomorrow at exactly noon, show up at the judge's courtroom, and I'll tell you, I guarantee you, he will give you your money." There was a little bit of hope back in his heart. After all, this was a noble lady, this was a Hanem in this big house. Maybe there was some hope. So finally, there was some hope. His hopes were raised, and he set out a little bit lighter. His shoulders picked up a little bit more. Well, the night went by. The next day came, and it was shortly before noon when suddenly the Hanem went to one of her most trusted servant girls and said, "Please bring all my jewelry and put them in a small, my best jewelry box." Since she was a wealthy lady, she had quite a lot of golden jewelry. So they gathered all her golden jewelry and put it in a beautiful, beautiful jewelry casket. And with that they set out and said, come with me, come with me." And they set out to the courtroom. And they walked through the streets until they came to the courthouse. Well, it was just a couple of minutes before noon, and the Hanem whispered something into the ear of her servant girl, and then disappeared into the courtroom. And there the judge was sitting behind his desk. She walked up to the desk, and she took the jewelry box, big jewelry box, and put it in front of the judge with a clunk and said, "I have a big problem." And she opened that box, and his eyes almost fell out of his head. All this jewelry there in the box. "What is your problem?" He said, "My husband, he left for Egypt several months ago to trade. Now he wants me to come to Egypt. And you know how it is. There's pirates on the way if I go by sea. There's bandits on the way if I go by caravan. There's always the risk of shipwreck. There's the risk of this and that. Who's going to keep my wealth safe? But I've heard about your proverbial honesty. So I figured you would be the best person to keep my wealth safe." Well, just then, it just so happened it was noon, and exactly noon, and the door opened, and in came our poor Chukchi. And he walked into the courtroom and walked to the desk of the judge and said, "Judge, do you remember me? I came several months ago. I gave you that big bag of money. Please, would you give it back to me?" Well, the judge looked at him. He looked at the incredible wealth displayed in front of him by the Hanem. He looked at that paltry bag of money, after all, compared to this wealth. And he talked to the lady and said, "You see how honest my proverbial honesty, how it is? Even without a receipt, I give them their money back." And with that, he reached in the cabinet next to his desk and handed the money over to the judge. Well, you can imagine with a big sigh of relief, the judge disappeared as fast as he could out of the courthouse and disappeared towards Anatolia. Well, just then, the judge, he was just about to close the lid of that box and take that box and put it back in the cabinet for the lady for safekeeping, when suddenly the servant girl ran in and said, "Oh, Hanem, listen, the most wonderful thing has happened. Your husband, he has just returned from Egypt, and he wants you to come home now immediately." Ah, with that, the Hanem closed the lid to the box, swept it off the desk, and disappeared out of the courthouse as fast as she could. And the judge was left there sitting with nothing, shaking his head, and said, "In all my years on the bench, I've never seen a case argued like this." So, and we'll do a Joha story, which is the Arab equivalent of Hajj Nasruddin. This is an Egyptian Joha story. And Joha is, of course, always smarter than everybody else, so there's always a way out. Whatever happens, there's always a means. He finds a way. So, in this story, Joha one day, but he always, you know, in typical Joha fashion, never prepares enough, never, you know, he's always a little on the short side here and there. So anyway, Joha one day sets out into the desert. He has to go to a village way out, an oasis, way out into the desert. And he sets off and he walks and walks through the desert. But of course, in typical Joha fashion, he doesn't bring enough food, he doesn't bring enough water. So shortly after he disappears into the desert, he starts getting thirsty, he starts getting hungry, and time goes on and more, further and further, and he gets thirstier and thirstier, hungrier and hungrier, and the sun is beaming down, burning down on him. He gets serious, he's starting to worry. After all, what is he to do? There's no food, there's no water. The sand stretches out in front of him, until finally, and he's almost desperate and getting really serious as he crests a hill. And he stands on top of the hill. There in the distance, he sees an oasis. Ah, a deep sigh of relief. He makes a deep sigh of relief. There's an oasis. There's some palm trees. There's a small spring of water, a small pool. There's some grass around it. And he disappears as quickly as he can. He comes down the Hamada. He comes down the sand dune. And he makes his way to this oasis. And there in this oasis, there's a Bedou sitting there with a big leather cloth spread out in front of him and a veritable feast spread out in front of him. There's a big heap of biscuits, there's a whole leg of mutton, there's a big heap of dates, there's cheese, there's a feast spread out in front of this Bedou. Well, the Bedou finally hears a sound and he looks up and there's the Hoja there's the Joha coming down, and he says, and Joha standing there at the edge of the oasis looking at this feast, and his stomach starting to rumble. You can almost hear it rumbling. And finally the Bedou looks up and says, "Who are you and where are you from?" "Ah, me? I'm from your very own place, from your very own town, I'm from your very own tribe." "Ah, wonderful then," says the Bedou. Tell me, how is my wife?" "Ah, your wife, she's wonderful. She takes care of everyone. And anybody who has a need, they can come to her and she looks after him." "Well then, tell me, how's my son Suleiman?" "Your son Suleiman," he said, "is the delight of everyone's eyes. He's a flower amongst the children of the town." "Well then, tell me," says that Bedou, "how's my guard dog Murad?" "Ah, your guard dog Murad," says Joha. "He takes key. Nobody can come near the house without him alarming them. He's the best guard dog in the whole villages. Ah, they call him Militant Murad." "Well, how's my house?" "Ah, your house is a haven for any traveler. Anybody who has a need can find refuge in your house." He says, "Well, how's my camel? My camel Speedy." "Ah, your camel Speedy, he's eaten so much, he's almost grown a second hump." Well, by then, Joha definitely is expected to be sat down and be fed, but no, he can't sit down without an invitation, so he's standing there at the edge of the oasis, but no invitation is forthcoming. Absolutely no invitation. He's standing there, you can almost hear his stomach rumbling a quarter of a mile out in the desert, but no, Bedou just keeps eating and no invitation is forthcoming. Finally, after he's standing there for quite a while, his mouth almost drew him Saliva. This mangy old dog, completely, you can see the bones on his body. It also wanders out of the desert. It finally made it to this oasis. And he stands there next to Joha, also looking at this feast. But no, nothing is forthcoming. Nothing is being given. That man just sits there and eats. Until finally, he looks up and says, look at that mangy dog. What kind of dog is that compared to my dog, Murad? Well, says Joha, your dog Murad, he was a very, very fine dog. What do you mean was? What do you mean was? He died? Ah, yes, he died while chewing on a bone and choked on chewing on a bone of your camel Speedy. What do you mean, my camel Speedy? He popped off. Oh, your camel Speedy. He broke his legs and his neck when he stumbled over the grave of your wife. The grave of my wife? My wife is going to... Ah, yes, she died while grieving over your son Suleiman. My son Suleiman, where is he? What happened to him? The house, the old house, it fell down on top of him and killed him. Well, by then that Bedouin jumped up and he's tearing out his hair, saying, oh, catastrophe, oh, catastrophe, what a terrible news bearer you are. And with that he runs off into the desert. And Joha, he shakes his head. And he sits down by that cloth and he invites the dog and cuts a big piece of meat off and gives it to the dog and shakes his head. If only he followed the laws of hospitality, we could have been sitting here a long time ago. But sometimes, when there's meanness, there's always a means.
Yeah. One more. Yeah.
Okay, one day, in Turkey, there's the word hitch, and hitch means nothing. When you say hitch, it means nothing. But there's one town in Turkey, one village in Turkey, where hitch also means salt. Only in this village. Now it just so happens that in this village there's a young man named Hassan, and Hassan is a little bit simple, but very innocent, but somewhat simple. And when you tell him to do something, he has to keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it to himself so he doesn't forget it. And he works for a farmer, he works very, very hard. So one day, the farmer tells him to go to the market and to get a pound of hitch, a pound of salt. So, Hassan, he walks out and he walks to the market. But as he leaves the village, he walks into the rest of Turkey, where hitch means nothing. He walks and walks and walks and hitch, 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 until he comes to the river and there's a fisherman standing by the river. And the fisherman is fishing and he's standing there by the fisherman saying, hitch, 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 hitch.
You shouldn't be saying that.
Well, what should I be saying then?
You should be saying, may there be 2, may there be 3, may there be 4.
The fisherman is of course thinking about catching fish. Are you sure? All right, may there be 2, may there be 3, may there be 4, may there be 2, may there be 3, may there be 4, may there be 2, may there be 3, may there be 4. Just then he falls in with a funeral procession. They're carrying the person on a scaffold to the graveyard. And as they walking along, he walks behind them saying, may there be 2, may there be 3, may there be 4, may there be 2, may there be 3, may there be 4.
You shouldn't be saying that.
Well, what should I be saying then?
You should be saying, may God have mercy on his soul.
Are you sure? Okay. May God have mercy on his soul. 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 Just then he comes to a very dead dog that's been lying dead along the road for about 2 weeks, and you can imagine it really, really smells. So he stands there looking at this dog saying, may God have mercy on his soul. May God have mercy on his soul. May God have mercy on his soul.
I shouldn't be saying that.
Well, what should I be saying then?
You should be saying, what a terrible stench.
Are you sure?
Yes.
All right, all right. Oh, what a terrible stench. 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 And then just then he comes to town. And the first building he comes to is It's the bathhouse, the hammam. And out of the hammam come 3 ladies who've just been washed in their finery, perfumed, in their best clothing, with their bags around their shoulder, and he walks behind them saying, "Oh, what a terrible stench! Oh, what a terrible stench! Oh, what a terrible stench! Oh, what a..."
Saying that!
What should I be saying then?
You should be saying, "Oh, what a beautiful sight."
Are you sure? All right, only walk saying, "Oh, what a beautiful sight! Oh, 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 what a beautiful sight!" And just then he gets to the edge to the square, and there's 2 men who've gotten into a fight, and they're fighting with each other, they're punching each other, trying to throw each other on the ground. A whole group of people standing and watching this fight, and he's standing there saying, "Oh, what a beautiful sight! Oh, what a beautiful sight! Oh, what a beautiful..."
Don't say that.
What should I be saying
You
then?
should be saying, "Please stop fighting, gentlemen."
Are you sure? Please stop fighting, gentlemen. Please stop fighting, gentlemen. Please stop fighting, gentlemen. Please stop. And he gets to the edge of the marketplace, and there are 2 dogs that both found the same bone, and they're squawking with each other, all trying to squabble over the same bone. And he's standing there listening and saying, "Please stop fighting, gentlemen. Please stop fighting, gentlemen. Please stop fighting, gentlemen."
You shouldn't be saying.
Well, what should I be saying?
You should be saying, "Shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe."
Are you sure? Yes. All right. Shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe. And with that he walks into the marketplace, and the very first stall he comes to is the shoemaker's stall. And he stands there saying, "Shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe, shoe dog shoe, shoe dog."
You shouldn't be saying that.
Well, what should I be saying then?
You should be saying nothing. You should be saying,
Hitch. Are you sure? Hitch. Ah, hitch. And with that hitch, he goes to the grocer, he buys his pound of hitch, his pound of salt, and goes back to the farmer with his errand done correctly.
Opposite Books, and we're really glad that all of these people came today. A lot of these people didn't know that you were here, and we kept telling them this is the best bookstore in town. Please patronize this wonderful store, and we're asking that many good things will be happening in this store for them. More good people and more good events. Thank you so much again.